I know you're all curious, like, what is going on? What's this clown doing this week? I want to talk first about kids. So if you have raised kids, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about here. If you haven't raised children, you might still understand, and if you're going to raise children, this will be really helpful. Because if there's one thing that we can know about kids, is when kids are playing, they're completely into it, right? It's like, it's their whole world. Everything that they do when they're sitting, if they have a playroom or a play table or a special place where they have their toys, they've got this little kingdom that they've created and they rule everything in it. They put the voices in things. Everything goes just the way they want it to go. Agreed? Until somebody from this room, the living room, looks over and steps in and says, you know what? You can choke on that. That's just a little bonus. And then what's the kid say? No, I won't. Well, I'm taking it. No fair. They cry like no fair. And if you ever put a second kid in that room, you know you're going to hear fighting and squabbling, and that won't stop. What did I do? What? Oh, thank you. She has kids. It's what they do. It's their own little world. Don't mess with us. Leave us alone. One child, not a problem. And parent, problem. And another child, problem. And you're going to hear, for sure, at some point, it's not fair. That's no fair. Kids are fond of saying. And here's what I know about adults. We say it too. Only we don't use the words no fair or it's not fair. We use other phrases like, I don't understand why. Or, how come she got the promotion? I was here longer. Or, why does this kind of thing always have to happen to me? Underneath every one of those types of phrases, and you know what I'm talking about, it's this little kid saying, it's not fair. That's not fair. Am I just speaking to empty chairs today? You don't want to admit the truth of that? Of course it's true. We all do that. We may use different words as adults, but the meaning is the same. We cry it out every time something messes with our world or the reality that we've created that we want. And we don't want someone messing that up on us. And there's a character in the Bible that I just love, and I've taught from his story many times, and it's found in the book of Genesis from 37 to 50. That's 13 chapters. That's a lot. He's given a lot of text in Scripture. And when that happens, we should pay close attention, because there's something God really wants us to learn when the time is given that is given to Joseph. Now, this is not the Joseph of Joseph and Mary fame. This is the Joseph, the coat of many colors fame. This is the Joseph who was the favorite son of a very important and wealthy landowner farmer named Jacob. Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his other sons. And he gave Joseph this coat, this fancy, fancy coat, often referred to as the coat of many colors. And it set him apart from his brothers. And his brothers hated him for it. Joseph might have cried out, "Not fair. Why should you hate me just because I have a nice coat? Or because I'm better than you and Dad loves me more?" Every family has a favorite kid. It's true. And if you're a youth in here today, just know if there's more than one of you, you may or may not be that favorite. Just saying. I'm cruel when I'm saying. Anyway, Joseph had a dream given to him by God. When a dream is given to you by God, we often call it a vision. So he was given a vision, and in this vision, what he saw was 10 bundles of wheat. And they were bowing down to him. So Joseph was standing, the wheat was bowing, and Joseph, in his 17-year-old infinite wisdom, tells his brothers, "I had a vision. And in this vision, your wheat was bowing down to my wheat." And they hated him even more. But he wasn't done, because a few days later, he had another vision. And in this vision, it was expanded. And in this vision, he saw stars, and the moon, and the sun. And they were all revolving around him, and they were bowing and honoring him. And for some reason, historians to this day can't figure it out. He tells his brothers, "Hey, I had another vision. And this time the stars and the sun and the moon were all bowing down to me." And the brothers resolved to get rid of him. And so what they did is they dug a big pit, and they threw Joseph in it, and they took his coat from him, and they killed the goat, and they put the goat's blood on the coat, and they took the coat home and showed Jacob and said, "Yeah, I've got some bad news. Joseph was killed by some wild animals, and this is all we could salvage was his coat." Meanwhile, what they did with Joseph is they sold him into slavery. Not fair. If anyone could cry out not fair, it's got to be Joseph. What did he do to deserve that? Why would that be happening to him? Well, all of a sudden now he finds himself in Egypt, and he's a slave. And he's a slave in the house of a very important man in Egypt at the time. His name was Potiphar. And Joseph became Potiphar's house slave. But Joseph was a man blessed mightily by God. And it seemed like everything Joseph did served to rise him above other people. And so in Potiphar's house, before you knew it, he was made the chief of Potiphar's household. He handled Potiphar's money. He was so important that Potiphar told everybody, "Joseph, he's my guy. If I'm not here, Joseph speaks for me." Joseph became that important. He also became the apple of Potiphar's wife's eye. And Scripture said she lusted after him. She wanted him. And she kept making advances toward him. And Joseph kept saying, "No. No. This is not right. I couldn't dishonor my God, and I won't dishonor my master, Potiphar. This is wrong. You need to stop doing this." And one day, Potiphar went away for an extended period of time. When he was gone, she decided that this would be the moment that she would force Joseph into having an affair with her. And so she physically dragged Joseph into her room, but Joseph escaped, and she tore a piece of the cloak that he was wearing. But he got away. He did the right thing. And what was his reward for doing the right thing? When Potiphar came home, she said to Potiphar, he tried to rape me. Look, I tore a piece of his coat. And so Potiphar had him thrown in prison. No fair. Joseph had done nothing wrong. In fact, he'd done everything right. He was trying to honor her. This is not fair. And while he's in prison for years, God gives him a gift of being able to interpret other people's dreams. And he became popular in the prison. And the other prisoners loved him. And they would go to him regularly and seek his counsel on many, many things. Even the guards loved Joseph in the prison. And one day, there was a cupbearer, and a cupbearer essentially is a food taster for the king who had fallen, or the Pharaoh, who had fallen out of favor with Pharaoh, and he was put in prison. And he had a dream, and his dream was that, doesn't matter what his dream was, but he went to Joseph and he said, Joseph, can you interpret my dream? And Joseph said, I can and I will, but you do me this favor, make me this promise. And the cupbearer says, what? No, promise, yeah, I'll do whatever. This dream's driving me crazy. And Joseph said, promise me that when you are restored in the Pharaoh's good favor, that you will remember me and you will tell Pharaoh that I interpreted your dream and it set you free and restored you to him. And the man said, absolutely, I'll do it. So Joseph told him, in 3 days, you're going to be sent for, and the Pharaoh's going to have a change of heart, and he's going to once again bring you into the palace, and you'll restore your former position. And sure enough, it happened. But here's what didn't happen. The cupbearer forgot to tell Pharaoh. He broke his promise. No fair. It's not fair. And Joseph spent years more in prison. And then Pharaoh has a dream, a series of dreams, and he can't figure out what those dreams mean. He's bringing in people from all over the world to try to interpret these dreams because they are so real to him and they haunt him so much, and he has to know the meaning of it. And finally, a light bulb goes off in the cupbearer's head, and he said, you know, Pharaoh, when I was in prison, I met a man. His name is Joseph. And he can interpret your dream. So Pharaoh sends for him. And he speaks with Joseph, and he asks Joseph, can you interpret these dreams? And Joseph says, no, I can't. Come on. He says, no, I can't, but God can. And if you want me to, I can tell you. And Pharaoh said, yes, I need you to tell me. And so he proceeds to tell Pharaoh, listen, this is what's going to happen, is that in Egypt, you're going to have 7 years of prosperity like you've never, ever seen in your life. But it's going to be followed by 7 years of the worst famine that could ever befall a country or a region. And Pharaoh believed him. And Joseph said, what you need to do is you need to start setting aside 20% of every harvest. And you need to store that. And if you do that for the 7 years, you will have enough to see you through the next 7. And Pharaoh went a step further than just doing it. He put Joseph in charge of it. In fact, he made Joseph second in command of the whole country of Egypt. Wow. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, Jacob and his 10 sons were starving to death, as were all their families. They were going through this famine and they had run out of food. And Jacob said to his 10 sons, I hear there's food in Egypt. Take this gold, go to Egypt, And even if you have to trade a gold for a bag of wheat, you do it. Because surely we will die if you don't. So the brothers set out, and they got to Egypt, and who did they have to appear before? Joseph. They didn't recognize him, but Joseph recognized them. And when they got there, what did they do before Joseph? They bowed down for wheat. Wow. Just like Joseph's dream had said 22 years before. And Joseph, in recognizing them, he didn't want to play a trick on them, but he wanted the whole family to be gathered. So what he did do is he agreed to sell them wheat, but he said, I think you're spies. And they said, we're not spies. We're 10 sons, actually 11, because our youngest son is home of one man, Jacob, and they tell a bit of Jacob's story, and he said, we would never be spies. And Joseph said, I think you are. I think you were sitting here to see how much stuff we had in Egypt so that you could figure out a way to take it. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to keep one of you here and put him in jail. The rest of you I'll send home. And I'll send you enough food and supplies to get you home and enough to sustain your families until you come back and you bring your youngest brother with you. You see, after Joseph was taken, Jacob had another son. And Joseph wanted everyone together. And so they did as Joseph said. They still don't know this is their brother. And they go back and they tell Jacob and they say, Jacob, Dad, here's what happened. And he's told us that the only way he'll give us wheat, because he thinks we're spies, is if we bring Benjamin, that was the youngest brother, if we bring him and show him to the man that we met with. For a second command. And so Jacob said, I can't send him, but I'll go along with you all. So the whole family went. And now, just like Joseph's second vision, the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole family was bowing down before Joseph. And then Joseph revealed who he was. Because, of course, 22 years of events. 22 years of Joseph being separated from his family, falsely accused, imprisoned, forgotten, promises broken. And now he's got his family back together. He said, I'm Joseph. Dad, I'm your long-lost son. Brothers, I'm the man. Of course, they were scared to death because they thought he was going to be out for revenge. But he wasn't. And I don't want you to miss this because it's so important, because it's what this story is all about. 13 chapters, a big, long story, and it all points to this one verse in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. It says this. What Joseph said to them is, you intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. Do not miss the importance of that verse. This is not just a slogan, because some people say that, what other people intend for harm, God intends for good. We sometimes say that, and I don't know that we really think it through. This is profound, important theology. This is all about God's sovereignty. And sovereignty is just a fancy word for saying that God is in control of everything. God is over everything. And it's revealed in this verse. Joseph's entire story, everything that happened, led to us being able to see this today. And people through the ages, of course, seeing it as well. And we say we understand this concept, we think we do, but do we really? You see, in Romans 8 and 28, it says this, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. See, God causes. God is in control. He's moving the pieces that surround us and that are in us. And we find ourselves sometimes when we're facing setbacks, or maybe we're suffering from something, and we tend to cry out, "It's not fair. It shouldn't be happening to me. Why isn't God doing something? Isn't God supposed to be protecting me? Isn't that God's job?" I don't even know if I believe in him anymore. No show of hands. But in a room this size, some of us have said that. Probably more than most of us at some point have said that. Somehow, we've gotten this false notion in our heads that when we become a Christian, that God's job becomes making our world perfect for us. I don't know where that comes from, but it's not true. That is not God's job to make the world perfect for us. It's not what the Bible teaches. Look at what Jesus says in the book of John. This is from Jesus' own lips. "I have told you these things," and he's talking about the things he just taught them, "so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart. I've overcome the world." See, Jesus tells us, in this world, you will have trouble. Every person in this room at some point has faced a setback, has suffered over something, has had some sort of trouble in their lives. And we should not be surprised, because Jesus told us it was going to happen. It's a hard truth, and it's not easy for us to swallow sometimes, but if we can get this today, it can change everything for us in how we face life, if we can get this. We should actually expect to see trouble in our lives. Oh, that's a cheerful message. But we should. Because this is a fallen and rotten world that we live in. We can position ourselves to turn to instead of away from God when times get tough. Because God is not failing us, he's preparing us. This is a deep truth. You will face troubles. Things will happen. And you will wonder why, but God is not failing you. He's preparing you. And this is an incredibly important concept to understand. So let's go back to our kids' room for just a minute, okay? Because when God first created man and woman, when he first created people, he placed them in a perfect environment where they lived in peace and harmony. And it was a world that, even though God had created it, just like the parents actually provided these toys for the kids, but they were all given to them. And God said, do whatever you want with all this stuff I made for you. Just don't do this one thing, okay? Can you just not do that one thing? That's it. And what happens when you tell a kid that? Could there be anything more that they ever wanted than that one thing? And Satan entered and he used that one thing to create the worst choice ever. When people decided in their puny little brains that they could rule the living room from the playroom and become God themselves. That somehow what they did here mattered more. Because see, here's how God positions himself. God actually positions himself where he can be in either of these places or both of these places at once. And he sees the bigger picture. Parents, when you're sitting in your living room and your kid is in the playroom, you see a picture that kid was never ever meant to see. And when you said, I just don't want you playing with this one thing, or I just don't want you touching this one thing, it was not to harm, it was to help. See, God, when he said, just don't eat of this because then you'll know the knowledge of good and evil, He wasn't trying to deny them something. He was trying to protect them from something. And when they chose to do that anyway, the relationship changed. And slowly, actually not slowly, very quickly, the world became a dangerous, inhospitable place full of disease, full of famine, full of pain, full of mistrust and lies and cheating and stealing and murder, wars. And God never intended that. He never wanted that. But it's the reality that we're in. And because it's the reality that we're in, God needs to prepare us to navigate that and walk through that effectively. And he does it in a way, a couple of words that aren't common in our vocabulary today, but probably should be. He does that through discipline, in an old-fashioned word called punishment even, or at least what feels like punishment. Because God needs to prepare us. Because left to our own devices, we will destroy ourselves. And so he sets boundaries and he steps in and he causes sometimes things to happen that are designed to strengthen us. Let's look at this scripture from Hebrews. And it's a difficult scripture and people don't normally teach from it because, well, you'll see. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. See, God has set a path before us, and we're to step into this path that God has set. Let's keep going. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. And have you forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you as his children? He said, "My child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline. Don't give up when he corrects you, for the Lord disciplines those he loves. And he punishes each one he accepts as his child." And punishment is not damnation, it's not going to hell, but it's understanding punishment, right? Sometimes we punish our children, like, I don't know what you're allowed to do today, it's been a long time since I raised kids. But I grew up in a generation where you had to stand in a corner, there's punishments, there's consequence, I think is the word we use now. And at least we did a few years back, might be something different. In any case, this is what God is doing for us. The scripture is telling us that God is doing it. Let's keep reading. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. You should feel special because he loves you. Who ever heard of a child who was never disciplined by his father? If God doesn't discipline you as he does all of his children, it means that you are illegitimate and not really his children at all. Isn't that interesting? And just like those first children, just like those first people, they wanted to do everything themselves to the extent that they were willing to disobey and even disown their very creator and say, we got this, we want to be in control. And scripture tells us that type of thinking makes you illegitimate. When you are connected to God, he is going to discipline you. He is going to grow you. He needs to because he loves you. And he knows the perils that we face. Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they knew how. But God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in his holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It's painful. But afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. Do you know that when you connect with God through Jesus, God's primary job in your life now becomes to conform you into the image of his Son. He wants to make you more and more like Jesus. More and more like Jesus. And we fight it. And when we fight it, he needs to get us back in position. God's primary job is not to make our life easy. It's not to give us planes and Rolls Royces. It's not to fill our bank accounts. It's not that. It's to conform us into the image of his Son. That's why we connect. And this is now what God is doing. Over time. So let's just skip. I just want to give you a couple of final thoughts to remember. So there was more scripture I was going to read, but I got to move through it. So Sally, if you can get right to the very last slide, that'd be great. Sometimes God allows what is happening to happen. Other times he authors the events. But he is always in control. That's why we have to learn to turn to him, not away from him when times are tough. Let that sink in. Sometimes God allows what is happening to happen. Other times, he actually authors it. He actually causes it. But he's always in control, and this is what we can trust in. So that when these things are happening, rather than saying, God, why is this happening to me? You turn it the other way around and say, God, what am I supposed to learn? If I learn it quickly, can I get through this more quickly? God is in control and he loves you. He wants what's good for you, not what will harm you. When you step into that relationship with God through Jesus, his Son, through what Jesus did, your life is not going to be perfect yet. Because we live in this mess. But we're heading to heaven. We're heading for that perfect union where God, who is the author and the finisher of our faith, will perfect us in that relationship. But on this side of heaven, like Jesus said, there will be trouble. There will be. But lean into God in those times, not away. He'll lean back into you.